with who the backup is and the celebrity status that he carries, I would have avoided that at all cost. We'll see how it goes moving forward. It'll be interesting, but you wait and see. If Quinn gets off to a slow start at any point the rest of the way, people are going to be screaming at the top of their lungs in DKR to get Arch Manning in the game. That's not good for the dynamic in that locker room whatsoever. Hello and welcome to Always College Football. Today is October 21st, and I'm your host, Greg McElroy. We appreciate you being with us today. It's going to be a great show. As you guys know, on Mondays, we always do our 10 big takeaways from the previous weekend. And one thing I've noticed, man, the level of panic across the board for so many teams is at an all-time high. It used to be like, all right, there's a few teams that panic on a weekly basis, but now it's like, oh my goodness. I mean, people are losing their minds in so many different places, like Oklahoma, Alabama, Kentucky, USC, Michigan. People are losing it. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm saying they should. The fanaticism is what makes the college football world go round. So I love it. I love everything about it. But let's bring a little perspective. Let's bring us back to reality just a little bit. All right. As always, we encourage you guys to like, rate, and subscribe to the show, wherever you get the show. Those of you that are joining us on the podcast platform, we have so appreciated all of you that have been coming out and giving us a rating and giving us a review. We had our ratings and reviews sabotaged because a certain team that's now 1-6 didn't make the playoff last year, but you guys have responded and you guys have answered back. So we greatly appreciate the support that you have shown the show. And if you're here with us via the ESPN YouTube channel, hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about what went down this past weekend in college football. Takeaway number one. Even in the 12-team playoff era, panic is still the flavor of the week. The level of panic going on in more than a few places is reaching fever pitch. Whether it's Oklahoma, Alabama, Kentucky is freaking out, Michigan's freaking out, USC's freaking out. A lot of teams that were feeling pretty good a few weeks ago. Well, here we are now, fast forward, and people are about to lose their minds. And I love it, right? Like, I'm not in this business for people that are feeling indifferent. I don't want to serve the audience of people that just casually consume college football, because those are the people that make a bet here or there. Like, all right, yeah, I'll watch this game. No, I want people that are about to lose it in the event in which their team loses. So I appreciate very much the fanaticism. But what I would say is that when you look across the board, like look across the college football landscape right now, just across the board, like I don't care if you're the number one ranked team in the country and you're Oregon and you're sitting there at the very top of the mountain and you're just looking down. How many teams right now appear to be juggernauts? Just across the board. How many? Because I've looked at every single team. I've watched their coaches tape, all the contenders at least. If you want me to be real, I haven't watched a Kennesaw State snap this year, but I'm not sure I need to. Hasn't come up on this show just yet, and if it hasn't been here by week 8, then we're probably not going to have to talk about them. So, yes, of all the teams that are contenders and pretty much everybody in the Power 4, I've watched at least 2, maybe 3 games. Just to see where they're at, just to get an evaluation. In some cases, maybe it's 2.5. In some cases, maybe it's pieces here. A few drives here. Had a pretty good look at everybody. And I got news for you, man. The talent that at one point was consolidated at just a few schools. I mean, let's be real. There was a while there where there were like only 4 or 5 teams that could win a national championship. That's not the case this year. And it's because of a few things. One, the transfer portal. Guys that are 2 and 3 years into their career are not wanting to just sit around and be content being a developmental role player. They're now leaving. Some of the big boy schools are losing their depth. So now their depth are freshman. And then you look at the next layer of the conversation, these new conferences and the unfamiliarity with how to manage this new conference and the unfamiliarity about how to attack a certain team is a very real thing. And also, I think NIL has created a lot of parity in the sport. So as a result, everybody's panicking. I thought it was really well summed up by a good buddy of mine who, going into this past weekend, is looking at it from a Georgia fan's perspective. He's a Georgia fan, die hard. He said, we might stink, but so does everybody else. I thought that actually made sense. Because from a Georgia fan's perspective, going into last week, they didn't feel great about what they'd done. They didn't feel great about what they had on defense. They weren't super fired up about how Carson Beck was playing. They were a little concerned about how the offensive line was playing. A little concerned about how they were unable to run the football. Like Georgia's going into last week against Texas thinking, man, I don't know, we got some holes. Well, now they feel great today. But a week ago today, they didn't feel so good. And that's kind of everybody. It's almost week to week right now with how you feel about your own team. So panic is still very much a thing, but I'm just caution all of you. Don't jump to conclusions too soon because it's not about where you're at today on October 21st. It's about where you're at in December and January because that is when the championships are crowned. So the teams that continue to improve, they're the ones that are going to be rewarded in the very end. A couple other panic moves, by the way. East Carolina fires Mike Houston. He's the first FBS coach to be fired this year. They're now 3-4. ECU is. They got beat by Army this weekend. Feel bad for Mike Houston. Tough spot. 27-38 at ECU. Was hired back in 2018. Had a really nice run there at James Madison, but it just didn't materialize. Southern Miss has fired Will Hall. He's 14-30 in his 3 years. 1-6 this season. I don't know what the expectation level is at Southern Miss, man. They are struggling. Oklahoma has fired their offensive coordinator, Seth Luttrell. They've scored just 12 points in the last 2 games and are averaging 4.3 yards per play in the first season in the SEC. My question there, though, is maybe you had to do it, but have you seen the personnel that Seth Luttrell's had to call plays with? Unless Seth Luttrell's replacing his offensive line with a brick wall, I'm not sure what you could do. And he's got wide receivers that are probably 6th on the depth chart that are being forced into primary roles. Not ideal. Utah's fired Andy Ludwig. He's the OC there. Now, they struggled last year, obviously, but Cam Rising wasn't available. And they've struggled so far this year. Cam Rising hasn't been available. I mean, he was at one point supposed to be the OC at Notre Dame. Like, Andy Ludwig didn't just decide to forget how to call games. It's just crazy, man. The panic is everywhere. And speaking of panic, I want to get to this because I know everybody's going to want to hear takes on this, okay? Georgia and Texas, we will break down the game in a moment. But I want to address the pass interference penalty there in the third quarter, okay? So for those of you that have been under a rock and are unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, I'll set the stage for you. Georgia's up 23-8 in the third quarter. Carson Beck working to his left, throws an interception. It's returned by Jahdae Barron all the way back down, gets into great field position for the Texas offense. Official throws a flag. You can see at the top of the route, the wide receiver and Barron both contacting each other at the top of the route. They throw a flag. This is where the mistake went down. It is not uncommon, by the way, for officials after a close bang-bang play to huddle up and have a discussion. That's not uncommon at all. It happens every single week in every game. I call games every week. I'm sure several of you have been to games. You've seen officials get together and huddle up and discuss a call. That happens all the time. But in this particular case, the referee actually turned on his microphone, announced pass interference against the defense, and an automatic first down for Georgia. And then they huddled up. It should be the other way around. They should have huddled up, had a long and lengthy discussion. I don't care if it takes 5 minutes. You got to get that call right. So the officials are sitting there talking to each other on the field prior to the official turning on his microphone and making an announcement. It was the other way around. People, I think, the optics are bad. And the execution from the referee and the technique of the referee to make the call before the huddle was bad as well. But the optics make it look worse because it makes it look like the penalty was overturned because stuff was thrown on the field. That's not the case. The penalty was overturned because that was the correct call. It wasn't replay reviewed. They didn't go and look at the monitor. It was the correct call not to throw a flag. And they got the call right. They got the call right. But the optics look bad because of how things all worked out throughout that short 2.5 minutes. Had he just not said a word, they huddle up. They ultimately decide to pick up the flag. Would have been no problem whatsoever. There would have been no strong reaction from Kirby Smart. And they could have avoided a whole lot of issues. At the end of the day, they got it right. And at the end of the day, it didn't affect the outcome of the game. So we've been talking about this play now for nearly 48 hours. And it's like, why do we still care? The right team won. The better team won. The optics are bad. And hopefully moving forward, the mechanics used by the referee will be better as well. Takeaway number 2. Georgia's defense turned back the clock to 2021. Now, they dominated. They dominated in the first half of that game, wouldn't they? I mean, it was to the point almost when you're watching it and you're like, golly, is Texas going to be able to move the ball at all? And you really went on the whole game. Now, there were a couple things that Texas was able to find in the second half. But all in all, when your defensive team stats look like this, you look down at the turnover part and you see that they forced 4 turnovers, you're thinking, all right, my chances of winning the game are pretty dang good. And you go and you look at havoc created. You look at 10 tackles for a loss. You look at 7 sacks. You think to yourself, all right, yep, I think Georgia probably won that one, right? That's all I need to see from the defense are those few things, and I know I'm in a pretty good spot. Well, I think what's great about Georgia has stars on defense. They have stars. They have individual players that are stars at their position. No doubt about it. But on a big stage, you really need your stars to play like stars. I mean, it is imperative. If your best player on the biggest stage or one of your best players on the biggest stage disappears, that's not just an indictment on him, but that's an indictment on the fact that your team's probably not going to win. You need your best players to be at their best on the biggest possible stages. And that's exactly what happened because you look at Dalen Everett, he's their best corner. And he's had challenges this year with consistency, but he's their best corner. Well, you recover a fumble, you intercept the pass, you really give your offense plenty of great opportunities. Damon Wilson is an edge defender who's kind of been coming on. It's been coming on. He forces a fumble. Jalen Walker recovers that fumble with about 30 seconds left going into halftime. Later, you recover a fumble by Mykel Williams that was forced by Mykel Williams, who now looks back and healthy. And when you think about your defense across the board and just how many great players Georgia has, to have the one step up on a stage like that is enormous. And that's why they won the game. I mean, the field position was a huge factor in the game, was it not? Georgia's average starting field position in the first half was its own 44-yard line. That's absurd. They scored 17 points off Texas turnovers. They also, throughout the game, were constantly able to get off the field on conversion downs, things that are backbreakers for the defense. 3rd down, 4th down, they got off the field. Texas 2 of 14 on 3rd down. 4 of their 6 second-half drives ended with turnovers on downs. I mean, that is a dominant performance. Also, don't do this very often. I don't want to make a habit of this, but when it's important, you have to acknowledge it. Want to give a little bit of a shout out to Georgia's punter, Brett Thorson. He was very, very impactful in this game. How many different times did he punt the ball and flip the field? And I looked up the stats, and I don't often, like I said, if I'm looking up special team stats, we got problems. All right. Like, you need to have a come to Jesus with me, because I'm not trying to get in that world. Like, I don't like special teams. It's a better game without them. That's what I've always said. But I digress. Okay. Thorson averaged over 50 yards a punt, 54 to be exact. He also constantly pinned Texas deep in their own end. Now, for Georgia's offense, not great. A lot that needs to be sorted out on that side of the ball. Passing game, huge issue. Bunch of interceptions, a lot of drop passes, errant throws. That, I think, is something that needs to get ironed out for sure. And maybe that's something we address a little later in the week, because the offense is not where it needs to be for Georgia. But that defense, that was a vintage Georgia defensive performance. And it was really nice to see, because I don't feel like I've seen it in a few years. Takeaway number 3. Texas got baptism by fire this past weekend, didn't they? Let's start with the positives, because there are some positives to be taken from this performance. I thought the defense played really well. I mean, they just held Georgia to 283 total yards. They just allowed Georgia to go 4 yards of play. And this is an explosive group, right? This is an explosive Georgia offense that can pile up yards in a hurry, that can push the ball down the field. Like, this is a good, solid offensive attack with great firepower. So to keep them in check the way they kept them in check is really beneficial. Here's the problem. The Texas offense, man, and I thought that maybe the first quarter of the performance against Oklahoma was the anomaly. Now I'm concerned, okay, to not be able to run the football whatsoever. I mean, they could not do anything on the ground. They rushed for 2 yards on 16 attempts in the first half. And I know sacks factor in and things like that, so it's not the best indicator. But if you look at who dominated the line of scrimmage in that game, and by the way, Texas is supposed to have a really good offensive line. That was not the case. All right. They were constantly fighting an uphill battle as far as field position. They had 3 drive starts inside the 15-yard line. They really, after the interception by Andrew Makuba, they go and they get a pretty good spot. They're sitting there at the 34-yard line, thinks this thing could flip in a hurry. Well, they run 3 plays and they go backwards. I mean, that's not it, man. They had really no answer on the edges. I mean, no, don't get me wrong. How many teams have a tandem of Jalen Walker, Wilson, and Michael Williams that are coming off the edge, right? I mean, there's not many teams that have that, okay? There's not. So they got to get that figured out. I mean, they gave up 7 sacks. Those 2 guys, Michael Williams and Jalen Walker, accounted for 5 of those 7 sacks. So it was a huge problem, no doubt. Penalties, also a huge issue. I mean, you're playing at home. And I know you're scared to death of these edge defenders. So you want to get a head start. I get it. You got 4 false starts. I mean, that can't happen, especially when you have one at wide receiver. That can't happen. It really killed 4 drives. Sitting there 4th and 1, UGA's 37-yard line in the 4th quarter. Penalty makes it 4th and 6, and you turn it over on downs. Like, you can't have that. But I do think there was another critical mistake made in this game, and that was the handling of the quarterback situation. Like, Quinn Ewers did not get off to a good start. Okay, he threw for 17 yards in the first half, had a couple turnovers before he was benched. Here's the problem, though, and it's one thing to bench a player. Oklahoma did this a while ago. They benched Jackson Arnold in favor of Michael Hawkins, right? Was it the right move against Tennessee? Perhaps. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I really don't know. All I know is that 98% of the college football world is unfamiliar with the hype surrounding Michael Hawkins. On the other side of the coin, 98% of the college football world wants Arch Manning on the field. Why? Because I think many people believe that he is the next generation of super, super great quarterback play. He's from, football's first family, all that stuff. So when your backup quarterback has rock star status, You just can't make that move there. You have to force your starting quarterback into feeling comfortable. And I know, hey, look, Arch goes in, brief spark, got the ball out pretty quickly, got off to an okay start throwing the football, had the nice run, pretty nice run. And maybe they thought his mobility would give them a little bit of a boost. But then you see he's still a young player. I mean, takes a bad sack. You have another sack, give a fumble away. It just wasn't the right time to do it. Look, I lived this in 2012. Mark Sanchez was the starting quarterback of the New York Jets. Tim Tebow was the backup quarterback, and I was the third string guy. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, and the fans are chanting for Tebow every single time. It's like the second Tebow goes on the field, I don't care if he just went on the field to personal protect on the punt. It was like a standing ovation. And it crushed the dynamic within the quarterback room. It was really impactful. Well, now Pandora's box has been opened because Steve Sarkisian showed that he is not afraid to replace Quinn Ewers in favor of Arch Manning in the event in which Quinn Ewers struggles. That's a problem because now, first series of the game, if Quinn Ewers starts a game 1 for 3 and they punt after a 5-play drive stalls, you're going to start hearing chants of Arch. So the only way you could have pulled the plug on Ewers is if Arch is going to be your guy moving forward. So I think opening up Pandora's box is something that was a huge mistake. I don't think Quinn had done enough at that point to justify being replaced or pulled. And I do think Steve Sarkisian, very few people in the country handled that position better than him. He played quarterback. He's been in those shoes. He's been in that helmet. He's been in those meeting rooms. With who the backup is and the celebrity status that he carries, I would have avoided that at all costs. We'll see how it goes moving forward. It'll be interesting, but you wait and see. If Quinn gets off to a slow start at any point, the rest of the way, people are going to be screaming at the top of their lungs in DKR to get Arch Manning in the game. That's not good for the dynamic in that locker room whatsoever. Takeaway number 4. Tennessee is really close to being a championship contender. Now, a lot of people continue to say, I think it's 2 average teams from this past weekend. Tennessee's average. Guys, I understand that while Tennessee, first of all, like I said at the very beginning, you might think Tennessee's average, but tell me who's not. Tell me who has at times not looked average this year. Because there's not very many teams. And in a 1-game season in the playoffs, how many of y'all feel really good about consistently moving the ball against that defense? Now, that is, defense travels. I still believe that there's a place for defense to win championships. That defense is fantastic. At all 3 levels. Was worried about the injury to Keenan Peely. Not a problem. T-Lander went in, played really well. You look at the back end, been concerned. I've been concerned about their secondary. I thought it was a huge question mark coming into the season. I did hear also, though, in fall camp, and if you look back at our show, and I told you names to remember, I told you need to remember the name Jermod McCoy. Jermod McCoy has been really good for Tennessee. Has a big interception in the end zone off of what I thought was a terrific defensive play. You look at where they're at right now. Vols are one of the top teams in the country as far as defending the opposition. They're able to rush the quarterback this past weekend against a pretty good offensive line, I might add. You get 12 quarterback hurries. You get 3 sacks. You intercept 2 passes. You add 6 more tackles for loss. And this defense is championship caliber. It's the offense that has maybe been holding them back just a little bit. And a lot of people have said, well, if Nico just hits deep balls. Yeah, and he hasn't. He hasn't done it. I mean, there have been countless misses downfield on overthrows against both Arkansas and against Florida. There have been a bunch of them. But with this offense, the way it's designed, I feel fairly confident they're going to continue to be able to run the football. I really like Dylan Sampson. I think he's one of the best backs I've seen this season. I've seen some really good running backs. Sometimes you have to see running backs in person. How hard do they hit the hole? How fast are they? Are they explosive? Are they electric? Dylan Sampson is excellent. Had the fumble early in the game, bounced back from that really impressively. Over 100 yards in the second half, 18 carries in the second half after 8 touches there in the first half. By the way, he was at one point banged up in the game. I am really optimistic about him as an individual. I think Nico's legs are a factor and something that you always have to be mindful of when you're trying to defend Tennessee. So the fact that the quarterback can run and they can run it over and over and over again, it forces you defensively to sell out against the run, meaning you're going to get a lot of one-on-ones on the outside. And I don't think Tennessee's receivers are outrageously good. They've been banged up, but they can win one-on-ones pretty regularly. So if this team moving forward can continue to run the ball the way they've run it and get you on islands in the back end, if Nico can hit 2 deep balls a game, that might be all they need. Might be it. And he hit 2 in this game. 1 on a 3rd and 6 rolling to his right down the right sideline, perfectly thrown ball. And 2 late in the game, slot fade, what ultimately ended up being the game-winning touchdown. All he's got to hit is 2 a game. Because the way they defend and the way they can run the football, the likelihood of you scoring 30 points on them is pretty small. But man, the way they can run it, the way they can tempo you and keep you off balance a little bit and hit a couple big plays downfield, man, they are not a team I would want to mess with moving forward. Their best football is probably in front of them too, if their quarterback can get some confidence. Takeaway number 5. Alabama is not dead yet, but they got to grow up in a hurry. So we'll start here. Looking at Alabama, there really is a lot to like. There's a lot of things that they do well. There's a lot of things that they do well. And coming into the performance against Tennessee, a lot of the questions have been about the defensive side of the football. Their inability to get off the field on 3rd down, inconsistent pass rush, a lot of youth in the secondary, guys that had struggled to be super consistent in the secondary. The linebackers looked like they were a little hesitant, maybe a step slow from time to time. I went back and watched that game against Tennessee, and I feel pretty good about what I'm seeing right now from the defense. And a lot of people are saying, well, if Nico hits a couple downfield throws, they score 40. Well, Nico hasn't hit a downfield throw in 3 weeks prior to playing this past weekend against the Tide. So, yeah, you could say that against Arkansas. You could say that against Florida. If they hit a couple downfield throws, they score 40. No doubt. But that's been the story of Tennessee's season. So Alabama, I thought, though, did a better job of tackling in a few different cases. I thought the front did a decent job making things somewhat uncomfortable for the run game. And I thought they got beat deep a couple times when they have youth in the secondary. It happens. It absolutely happens. I do think the secondary will get better over the course of time because they're young. They're going to get more confident. They're going to get more comfortable. They're going to have a better feel for the scheme. As far as the offense is concerned, right now, I think the offense runs almost exclusively through Jalen Milroe. And that's something I think that they're going to have to continue to evaluate. Because Jalen Milroe, the last couple weeks, has not been as accurate, has not been as decisive. Really starting, I thought he played pretty well in the Vanderbilt game. Did have an interception that was taken to the house, did have a sack fumble. But I thought that was a decent performance. But in South Carolina, he was trying to play hero ball a little bit, trying to do a little too much, not quite as decisive. Same can be said in the performance against Tennessee. Thought he had some really big misses in the game. If he hits a couple of open receivers, might be a completely different conversation because there were guys open. And there were some times when his feet were not aligned with where he was trying to throw the football, which led to an inaccurate throw. Now, he's dynamic, but we have not seen him the last couple weeks really take off and make sure that his legs were a huge factor in the game. So that, I think, is something they need to iron out. They need to take some of the responsibility off of Jalen Milroe and delegate it to the run game, which I think they have 2 good weapons at running back, and the offensive line running the football. The wideouts are fine. Ryan Williams, amazing. Jeremy Bernard's coming on. I think he's going to be good. And then lastly, they got to stop with the penalties. And I want to give immense credit to the Tennessee fan base and how hostile that environment was and how difficult it was for Alabama to communicate and how often Alabama was either having a false start or they couldn't communicate. And there were times where you're watching a play where the right tackle is running a different play than the right guard. Why? Because he probably didn't hear the call. That's a credit to the fan base. And that's a credit to the environment that they created for the opposing team. But they got to execute on a better level. Like the execution leaves something to be desired. And the dumb mistakes from penalty standpoint can't happen. Can't happen. Because right now, this team is not good enough to overcome self-inflicted mistakes. So all that being said, here's the silver lining. Okay? When you look at Alabama right now, the schedule they've played has been really difficult. Their opponents are a combined 34-15. That is the second best winning percentage in the country. So Louisville has the highest winning percentage. Their opponents are a combined 31-11. Alabama's are 34-15. The other three that round out the top five, Texas Tech is third, Michigan State is fourth, and Michigan is fifth. So they've played really good competition, but they need to improve, and they need to improve in a hurry because a lot of the things that happened to Alabama throughout the course of the game on Saturday were self-inflicted. That's encouraging and disappointing all at the same time, but it's got to get ironed out because it won't get much easier against Missouri, into the bye week, and then ultimately on the road at LSU. Takeaway number 6. All these teams that I'm about to go through, I was supremely confident in the preseason that they would be going to the postseason. Absolutely 100%. If I were to tell you, hey, if you were to come to me and say, Greg, should we make bowl plans? Like, are we good not scheduling a vacation because we want to go to our team's bowl game? I would tell you, yes, don't schedule that vacation. Your team is definitely going bowling. It's going to be just fine. Well, let's get to it. We'll start in the SEC. Don't make bowl plans just yet if you're Auburn. You are currently 2-5. Your projected win total as of this moment is 4.4. They've lost 5 out of 6. And if you looked at their schedule coming up, it's not looking very good. They're at Kentucky this week. Then they got a ranked Vandy team that's coming to them. Louisiana Monroe, that's a win. You got a ranked A&M team the week before you go on the road to play Bama in the Iron Bowl. Like, that is tough sledding if you're Hugh Freeze and the Auburn Tigers. Let's go to Kentucky. They're currently 3-4. Their projected wins are 4.99. You got Auburn this week. That game very much, by the way, might decide who goes bowling. If whoever wins has a real chance, whoever loses has no chance moving forward. They're at Tennessee. We know that'll be tough. Murray State, that's a win. So that'll at least get them to 4 wins at the bare minimum. At Texas, and Louisville's at home. So need 3. Well, you got Murray State. You might absolutely have to have Auburn this week. And you got to get Louisville at the end of the year, but you've had their number in recent years. So maybe you can get there, but I wouldn't make plans just yet. Oklahoma, they're currently 4-3. They are projected to win 5.86 games. They're at Ole Miss. Ole Miss coming off a bye week. I think that's going to be tough. Maine, we'll give them that one. That gets them to 5. All right, that gets them to 5. And they go to Missouri, toss up. Bama at their place. Don't feel great about that one before finishing up the season at LSU. There's a real chance that Oklahoma, who started the season in great shape, could end up losing, 7 of their final 8 or 9 games. It's crazy to think about. Let's go to the Big 12. Arizona, they're projected to win just 5 games the rest of the way. Arizona, a team that ranked high in the top 25, projected to win 5 games right now. West Virginia, I really like them coming into the season. They're projected to win 5.5 games. Oklahoma State, 5.5 games. Oklahoma State, I had playing in the Big 12 championship game at the beginning of the year, and things have gone off the rails. It was a better effort on Friday, but still not looking good for the Pokes. In Utah, maybe the most surprising. They're currently 4-3, but they've lost 3 in a row. Andy Ludwig, their offensive coordinator, just stepped down. They're at Houston, who's been playing better football of late, even though last weekend against Kansas wasn't so great. You got BYU, who's currently undefeated. I know it's a rivalry game. It's at your place, so that's at least a little benefit. You're at Colorado, who's really turned things on in recent weeks. Iowa State, who's undefeated. And then you finish the season at UCF. Right now, you're projected to win 6. It might be tough to get there if you don't beat Colorado and Houston, because BYU, Iowa State, and UCF all feel very difficult, even though UCF not that great. And then the Big Ten, Washington and Michigan. Crazy. Just crazy. Takeaway number 7. A few weeks ago, we watched a classic between Michigan and USC. So my takeaway is, what has happened to Michigan and USC? Who would have thought that when we watched that game a couple weeks ago, and I wasn't the only one watching, I think there were like 9 million people in America that were watching that game. How many of y'all thought that that game would be essentially meaningless as we fast forward to the end of the season? That those two teams would be venturing closer to no man's land than to the college football playoff conversation? Because I thought, hey, man, this could be the springboard for Michigan. Instead, that might have been the high point, because things don't look very good moving forward. We'll start with SC, though. This team has a remarkable ability to just find a way to lose. Isn't it wild? I mean, they've had several. And by the way, week 1, it was LSU on the other side that found a way to lose against them. So here we are thinking like, oh man, SC, that's a resilient bunch. Like, they just weathered the storm. They get the win against LSU. Like, here they go. They're off and running. Well, since then, how have things transpired for this team? So they're in a great spot. Great spot. Got a lead against Michigan. Got their defense on the field. Defense had played well. One broken tackle, and it's out the gate. They lose that game. Minnesota lose that game. And this past weekend, to be sitting there with a comfortable lead, looking at a team in Maryland that had yet to win a game in the Big Ten. By the way, Maryland had lost by 27 8 days earlier against Northwestern. And here we are watching the Trojans up 28-22, 2 minutes left. Everything's good, right? Everything's in a good spot. And then, obviously, it wasn't it. You have a field goal blocked. They don't block it correctly. Instead of being up 9, now, final couple minutes, they put their defense back on the field, and within a minute, Maryland takes it in for the game-winning touchdown. It's just mind-blowing, man. I mean, it's a team that now is in year 3 of Lincoln Riley. Roster, staff, all this other stuff. Like, everything should be trending in the right direction. It says it's trending the wrong direction. So I'm hoping they can get things rectified. But, man, they got to find a way to finish, because that has been a huge problem the last couple of weeks. And then Michigan. To think that this team was 10 months ago hoisting a national championship trophy is wild. They just scored 7 points against Illinois. That's their fewest since 2014. Their head coach in 2014 was Brady Hoke. That was his last year, and they were shut out in that performance that was against Notre Dame. So Michigan right now, they've lost 3 games, but gosh, doesn't it feel like it's worse than it is? I mean, it's not like the Minnesota game was resounding. Like, it required a pretty controversial onside kick situation to win that one. It required a monumental and Herculean task, being able to go and get the win against SC. This team is this close to being 2-5 and 0-4 in the Big Ten. Now, what's alarming, probably more than anything else, though, about Michigan, is that they're coming off a bye week. I mean, their bye week was set to try to figure out, all right, how can we fix things offensively? Like, what do we need to do? Like, what buttons do we need to press offensively to get this team playing a little bit better and a little more consistent? And that's the performance we get. Oh, hey, great credit to Illinois. Right? Great against Illinois. A defense that had challenges against the run. I took Illinois in the game. Like, I wasn't surprised with the outcome, but I was surprised to see Michigan score just 7 points. I was, especially knowing that Illinois had not been a team that was great against the run. But we're now looking at a team right now that is trending towards becoming one of the all-time worst in the year after winning a national championship. Now, the bar has been set by 1939 TCU. They went 3-7. 1943 Ohio State went 3-6. 2020 LSU, they went 5-5 after Joe Burrow and company won it the year before. So there is one from the modern era where LSU, the wheels came off, and that was a COVID year, so a little bit weird, but still 5-5 is 5-5. You have a 4-4 Notre Dame team in 1950 and a 1942 team in Minnesota. Well, Michigan currently sitting at 4-3, so they are above 500. But if you look at the wins that might be coming up, getting to a bowl game is not a foregone conclusion right now for the Michigan Wolverines. Takeaway number 8. The ACC has a potential mess that is looming. Miami, Clemson, SMU. Now, I stumbled across this yesterday, and I'm just so excited about it. Like, I love when I find like a loophole and something that I haven't really seen anybody else talking about. So I was really fired up as I was just kind of thinking through scenarios and thinking about future schedules and who's playing who and who's got what and all these other things, right? Miami, Clemson, SMU, they're all undefeated in the ACC, which is great. It's awesome. I know Pitt is too. Pitt plays 2 of the aforementioned 3. So that will resolve itself. And like I said, what are the odds of Miami, Clemson, and SMU winning every game from here on out? The odds are really small, but let's just have fun because we like what if scenarios in college football. Well, those 3 teams don't play each other. None. Miami doesn't play Clemson. Clemson doesn't play SMU. SMU doesn't play Miami. None of them play each other. None. So there is a possibility where you have a 12-0 Miami and an 11-1 Clemson and SMU with their only losses coming to out-of-conference opponents. Remember, Clemson lost to Georgia. SMU lost to BYU. So I decided to go and look at analytics and look up how likely is it that these teams run the table. Well, as of this moment, Miami has a 30% chance to run the table. That's the 7th best in the FBS. SMU has a 14.4 chance to run the table. That's 16th best. So we're talking like pretty good, pretty decent odds relative to the rest of the college football world. And then Clemson has a 13.8% chance to run the table. That's 19th best. So you have 3 teams with better than 13.5% to run the table and finish the season 12-0 and 11-1. Now, I looked at the ACC tiebreakers, and I got to be honest, they don't make sense to me. I don't know about y'all. Like, tie-breaking scenarios are always hard for me to figure out. You got the head-to-head winning percentage of the tied teams, and all the tied teams have common opponents. Well, they don't have common opponents. You got win percentage against all common opponents. Win percentage versus common opponents based on their order of finish. I mean, like, so if you want to take a chance, like, we'll put this link out either, here in the YouTube section, or we'll put it out on social media, always CFB. If you can interpret it, please help me out, 'cause I don't know. All I do is just put out the hypotheticals. Well, here's your break glass in case of emergency scenario. The winner of the ACC gets an automatic college football playoff bid and a top 4 seed, correct? So since they're undefeated right now, let's just say that's Miami. So Miami is in the CFP at 13-0. The loser of the ACC title game gets their second loss. Let's just say that's Clemson. And they go from 11-1 to now 11-2. Well, then you got SMU sitting at home on Championship Saturday with an 11-1 record. And then we fast forward to Selection Day on Sunday, and SMU is picked by the committee to be the 11 seed in the college football playoff. So imagine the fallout from that. Imagine the fallout where whoever has to play in the ACC title game, they lose, and the team that they beat out by way of a tiebreaker scenario actually gets in. So the team that doesn't play in the championship benefits from not having that second loss added. I'm just saying that is potentially really catastrophic for everything involving conference championship scenarios. I'm not saying SMU at 11-1 is going to get in or Clemson 11-1 is going to get in. I think, honestly, some of those teams are going to lose probably, and the ACC might only get one team in. But if you're looking at, say, a 2-loss Ole Miss team against a 1-loss SMU team, who gets the benefit of the doubt? It's going to be interesting. Just saying, keep an eye on the ACC title race. It could be very dramatic. And if you like drama, that might be the league for you. Takeaway number 9. There are some playoff contenders that nobody's talking about. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're so far away from the playoff. But people have just automatically written off Ole Miss. Just completely written them off. Ole Miss is done. They have no chance of getting back into the playoff mix. They have 2 losses. They lost to Kentucky at home. They lost at LSU. Well, according to analytics, they have a 26% chance of winning out. That's top 10, which would make them 10-2 with a win over Georgia. They've lost 2 games by a combined 6 points. And I think you can make a case they were the better team in both. You get a really good win potentially at home against Georgia. So I just don't think it's very wise right now for us as intelligent college football consumers to write them out of the playoff narrative just yet. And then this is the one that I think you're going to be really interested in. Guess who is a playoff contender that nobody's talking about right now? I'll give you just a half second to think about it. Just for drama and effect. It's just a half second. I feel like I'm on the broadcast and we're giving you the Aflac trivia question where like I know the answer, but we have to give the audience just a half second to think. All right, we ready? Okay, let's do it. Guess who's a college football playoff contender? Washington State. Did you guys pick them? I'm simply asking the question. I don't know if you did or not. They're not in the top 25 of the AP poll just yet. They're 26th right now. But I've seen a lot of people hypothetically start going through all these possibilities and Boise's in and all these other teams are in. We just went through a scenario a second ago about SMU being 11-1 and maybe getting in as an at-large team. What about Washington State, who right now is 5-1? Pretty good, right? The combined record of their opponents not named Hawaii. Combined record of their opponents not named Hawaii is 23-11. That includes a win against Texas Tech, who prior to last week and losing to Baylor was looking like a legitimate playoff contender or a legitimate Big 12 contender. But let's have a look at their schedule moving forward. According to ESPN Analytics, they have a 39% chance to win out. That is the second highest percentage in the FBS. Number 1 is Notre Dame, for those of you that are curious. So you're telling me there is a near 40% chance that Washington State is sitting at 11-1, their 1 loss coming to Boise, who might be in the playoff, and you have multiple wins over Power 4 conference foes like Washington, like Texas Tech. If you want to count Oregon State, there's a real chance, guys, that we fast forward and Washington State is in the discussion. Just saying, that's a playoff contender that nobody's talking about, and we might want to start paying attention. to what's going on at the Palouse. All right, takeaway 10. We do it every week. Our rankings for week 9 of the college football season. The top 12 are pretty simple, but 13 through 15 are worth a second look. Number 1's Oregon. I had them at 2 last week. I think they have one of the best wins in the country against Ohio State. Pretty justifiable, right? They're undefeated. They beat Ohio State, put them at 1. No questions asked. All good. At number 2, I have the Georgia Bulldogs. I had them at number 5 last week, but now you have 2 great wins. You beat Clemson, who I have currently ranked in the top 15, and you win at Texas, who I have currently ranked in the top 6. 2 good wins. Very few teams have 2 good wins. At number 3, it's Penn State. Illinois is what is boosting Penn State. I had them at 4 the week before, but Illinois, that win looks better for the Nittany Lions. So they moved from 4 to 3 ahead of number 4, Ohio State. Their best win was against Iowa, and that took a hit because Iowa just got drubbed this past weekend against Michigan State. But the eye test factor for Ohio State still feels very real. Like, I watched their game against Oregon. I still think Ohio State's really good. So they're really the first team that I have ranked almost exclusively on eye test and not resume. Number 5, Miami. Really no good wins. And they've been unimpressive defensively in each of their last 3 games. But those that push back on Miami and say they're not good, and I see it all the time, where should they be ranked? Like, where should you have them? Should you have them in front of Texas, behind Texas, in front of Tennessee, behind Tennessee, in front of Notre Dame? Like, they're undefeated. You got to give them a little credit. So I'm going to. I have them at number 5. At number 6, that's the Texas Longhorns. They were previously number 1. Like Ohio State, not really any good wins. But eye test is still pretty solid. Still think they're pretty solid. So I'm going to keep Texas there, right ahead of a team that does have a good win at their disposal, and that's the number 7 Tennessee Volunteers. They beat Bama. It's a good win. Yes, they've looked at times maybe a little bit uneven, especially on the offensive side, but they beat Bama. It's a top 15 win. Number 8, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I had them number 9 last week, move them up. That A&M win continues to get stronger. Really good for Notre Dame. You're going to say, well, they lost to NIU. Fine, I don't care. They still beat A&M. I care more about who you beat than who you lost to. I always have. That's why Notre Dame, even though everyone's all bent out of shape about it, I think they're still very much in the driver's seat for a playoff spot, and I have them at number 8. BYU is at number 9. I had them at 8 last week. 2 ranked wins. One of just a couple teams that have 2 good wins already this year. Georgia has 2 good wins, and BYU has 2 good wins. They beat K-State and SMU. Got to give them credit for that. I just think they're I just don't quite trust them all the way right now. Defense, I felt great about forever until last week. And offense, was really impressed with what I saw there. So maybe we're venturing towards a complete performance from BYU, but we're not there just yet. I have them at number 9. At number 10, big mover here, Indiana. Indiana is pretty good, man. Hammered a 5-1 Nebraska team. Dominant performance. Their quarterback's out for a bit. We'll keep an eye on them, but I have them at 10 for now. At number 11, LSU. I think they have a good win against Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is good. LSU, I have at number 11. They'll get a chance to play my number 12 ranked team, A&M. They have a good win against Missouri. Missouri's still staying in the top 20 as of this moment. So LSU at 11, A&M at 12. I told you the top 12 are pretty easy. To me, 13, 14, and 15 are where it gets a little bit trickier. At number 13, I'm going Iowa State. But here's the problem. They're undefeated, but their combined record of their opponents is 19-23. So yes, while it's undefeated, it's great. That's awesome. But who have they played? I mean, it is really a manageable schedule. Clemson is at 14. You think 19-23 is bad? Well, it's a little bit better than 16-26. That's what Clemson's opponents have played. 16-26. The only team they've played so far that they've beaten that has a winning record is Virginia, and they're 1 game over 500. So that one's a tough one to stomach. And then at number 15, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide. They were at 7 last week, dropped them quite a bit. It's a great win against Georgia, and they've played an amazing record so far at 34-15. But the only team they've played that's below 500 is South Florida. So Bama, I think, still with a lot of meat on the bone, but need to see more consistency on both sides of the ball. Hey, that'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Really appreciate all of you. Thanks so much for the support you've shown the show. Continue to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. And we'll be back on Wednesday with a conversation with NBC's Todd Blackidge. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.